Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. There is an old story, an old Buddhist story that I'm very fond of, even though it's kind of wild. And so you'll have to bear with me, as I said. The story goes like this, something like this. There once was an ascetic who was sitting in a cave, practicing meditation, I guess, and who had been doing so for a long period of time and many years, and who was growing rather impatient because he was not as far along as he thought he should be. So, as I say, he was sitting there when these thieves came into the cave who had just stolen a bull, a water buffalo. They didn't see this ascetic in the cave because he'd been there so long he was beginning to look like a pile of dust in the corner. And they killed the bull. They were going to divide up the bull, in different parts and then carry it off, and everybody get what they wanted from it. So when they killed the bull, they then somehow noticed the ascetic. And so they killed the ascetic is because he was a witness to the thievery. Well, the ascetic was so annoyed because he was under the impression that he was just on the cusp of enlightenment. So he was so annoyed that, they killed him by chopping his head off. And as I said, it was a rather wild story. So the ascetic, according to the story, grabbed up looked for his head, felt around for his head, and grabbed the bull's head and put it on his shoulders. And filled with rage over having been, from his perspective, prevented from attaining his enlightenment or whatever he had in mind, went on a rampage to the local area, killing everybody and everything he could get his hands on. And of course, this was very disturbing and inconvenient to everybody in the local area. So, this story, I believe, comes from Nepal. So, the local people prayed to the Bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri, to rescue them from this monster. And the Bodhisattva of wisdom appeared in a form. I'm going to go back slightly, because this metaphor, this whole story depends upon a particularly old thing about death and terror, which is pretty much universal, where death or the unknown is portrayed as if you're in a little passageway, where you can't get out, and a huge bull is charging down the passageway at you. Okay? Now, I don't know how many people can visualize how terrifying that would be. Probably for most people, theoretical. But it's a very, very old metaphor. It's why death is personified as a great bull in a lot of Asia, for that very reason. Am I scaring people at least a little? Or to understand the metaphor. Anyway, Manjushri appears in the form that's just called the Vajra or the diamond, all terrifying one. I've sometimes always found that very comforting, that there was something more terrifying than terror. okay, and filled the entirety of space with innumerable thousand hands and thousands feet, and multi-headed, and carrying all sorts of different weapons and fearful things in the hands, like in a great big circle. Now, our ascetic turned bull demon or whatever it was, runs away from this into the house that he's created. This house has all sorts of doors and windows, which the bull demon type thing can go in and out of and run around. Now, so that nobody misses the obvious, the bull, death, okay, or emptiness, or terrifying, because frequently when people have done Sanzen with me, they've talked about how fearful they are of pretty much anything, whether it includes like cooking. People tell me they're terrified of cooking, or they're terrified of children, or they're terrified of, if you know what I mean, as well as the big things. And of course, the house with the multi windows and doors is the self, is our body and mind, through which we receive all the different types of information, okay, from all the senses. And the self arising from that we use all these sensory information to basically confirm our selfishness and our ideas and our opinions. So, as I said, the bull demon type thing, which if you think also is unleashed selfishness, okay? If you can see its origin in the ascetic thought he was about to attain enlightenment. Kind of a peculiar notion. And that this thing prevented him. And of course, the fact that anger arose to such a terrifying degree was a great indication that he wasn't very far along any path at all. So, the Manjushri figure, the diamond all-around terrifying one, who has a bull's head, uses his 1,000 hands and feet to close off all the windows and doors. Okay, got me so far? Close off all the windows and doors, thereby forcing the bull demon type thing to sit still, because there was no longer any reinforcement coming from the outside. Forcing it to sit still, and in the story, converting it into ordinary death. That is the death that comes in the course of time, the simply ordinary functioning of death. Now, partly what brought me to talk about this is, as I said, hearing from quite a few people about their fears in Sanzen, but where many people were talking about their fears as if the fear itself was a concrete thing that prevented them from doing anything. And as if they were going to wait until the fear passed away or was taken from them before they actually moved or did anything. Now, everybody has karma from the past, from this life and previous lives, okay? All sorts of things that people have done unto us or that we have done. The Karmic results are reasons why we are the way we are. Okay? But the reasons are not the same thing as excuses. If you understand what I mean by that distinction. By excuse, I mean a get out of jail free card. The thing about karma and the law of karma is there isn't any blame in it at all, or judgment, or anything along those lines. It is simply that one thing follows from another, and this being the situation in which we find ourselves. Now, having said that, I think I will go back to my original topic and weave it into it. This is another story, and I like the quote from Charles Kingsley's, it's a children's book called The Water Babies, and he says, "Now, what I am about to tell you is just a story. It's all made up, and you do not need to believe it, even if it is true." So, a long time ago, the story says in the time of a previous Buddha, well before Shakyamuni Buddha came into existence, there was a woman. Her name that she was given by her parents meant something like joyful girl. In the course of time, she grew up. She belonged to a family of weavers, and she married and she became pregnant. One day, she was visiting the nearest large town or large city. This would have been in India. And there was a big festival going on. Okay? If you've ever been to any festival. I've never been to a festival in India. I've learned a lot about them. Sounds quite nice, actually. All the people there, she had gone there to sell her goods, okay, to set up a stall. And the people there said, well, why don't you come in and join in the festivities? You know, there's going to be dancing all night. I wasn't sure when I was reading the story whether there was booze involved. Okay, I honestly I couldn't tell. It just said she became so excited at the prospect that her eyes rolled back in her head, and she began to dance with a great deal of enthusiasm. So I don't know. You know what I mean? It might have been, but who knows? Doesn't mention specifically. But she had a wonderful time, except that she danced all night and wore herself out. And she miscarried. And she was filled with anger at this, and she swore a vow that she would have revenge on the people of this city for causing her to miscarry. Okay. Now, the force of such a vow or such an intention, particularly the intention towards violence, okay, or towards anger, when we make it, it has its own force, okay, that if we're not careful becomes beyond our control. It's why in Buddhism, the teaching of the Buddha, the idea of revenge is considered such an evil thing for people to engage in, because it means you're setting up a wheel within yourself that you will not be able to control without considerable effort. In any case, she passed away in time and was reborn in the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, a little aside, everybody in world history pretty much everywhere until roughly the modern period have believed in and experienced what they called gods, spirits, all those sorts of things. And in a sense, panic, the word panic, is related to the fear of seeing that which we do not want to see. So leaving that aside, okay? So this woman, as the result of her karma, was reborn as a yaksha, which is what people at the time considered a god, spirit, if you know what I mean. Don't think of it quite like, say, elves and fairies, because they've kind of become sanitized, but you know what I mean? Fearful thing that go bump in the night. You're familiar with that? From goalies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night, dear Lord, deliver us. The old Scottish prayer. It wasn't a joke either, they believed it. So in any case, and we've all experienced, I would imagine, fear in the night. Okay, you go out to the toilet, well, in our case, we have an outhouse, so go out to the outhouse, and common sense, whatever that means, tells one there is nothing there in the dark, but something older, than that tells us that there probably is. In any case, so she was reborn as one of these, whatever they are, but she was reborn with the force of that vow to take revenge. The vow towards violence. Her family, that is her family of these type of beings, noticing this tendency towards violence, sent her away from the city to live elsewhere, and she married this similar being, and she had many children, and the scripture says 500. But she was a bit of an unusual being, if you know what I mean. But she had 500 children. And remember that she had sworn this vow of revenge against the people of this city. So, again, an aside, how you interpret this, I do not know. But she destroyed the children, the local children. Okay, now some people interpret this as she was the embodiment of smallpox, okay, which carried off children at the time. As a matter of fact, they think that all the statues that exist of her seem to have come about around the same time of a major smallpox epidemic that existed throughout the European world. But that's a sort of aside. But in any case, she devoured children. That's the way it puts it. She destroyed children. The local people were terrified. Okay. In India, there are the things called the matrikas, the mothers. Okay, who are the oldest things, called the mothers of the dreadful glow, who are so terrifying you're not supposed to think of them, which I'm kind of doing, but you're not supposed to think of them, refer to them, speak of them, or have anything to do with them, because they're so terrifying. But in any case, the local people came to the Buddha to ask for help as to what they could do in this situation, that their children were disappearing and being destroyed. The Buddha went, in discerning what was causing this, went to where this Hariti, which means the thief, the stealer, was living. She was out, presumably destroying children, I don't know. And so the Buddha encountered her youngest child, who he hid underneath his begging bowl. Begging bowl turned upside down. Hariti was so distraught that she went looking all over the place for her youngest child until somebody suggested to her, why doesn't she ask the Buddha? And she said something like, that ascetic that sits up on the landing up there? And they said, yes, go and talk to him. So she went, and she was so distraught that she threatened suicide. The Buddha said to her, you feel such anguish over the loss of just one of your 500 children. Think of the local people who have only 1 or 2 children, themselves, and have empathy towards it. This caused her to have empathy, and as a result, the Buddha gave her the 5 precepts. Now, she did say, what am I going to eat if I can't eat the little children? So there's the practical element. And the Buddha said, pomegranates, apparently, according to the story. Pomegranates. Just the thing. Why? So she was transformed from a fearful being, into a guardian of children. And the Buddha promised her as well, when she said what was she going to eat, the Buddha promised her that in monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, they would make an offering of food to her. And when we do a formal meal in the meditation hall, a little bit, there's an ancient custom, goes back to the Buddha and to this story. A little bit of food is gathered from each monk and then taken outside. And it says it's offered to the hungry ghosts. Well, the offering is done to her and to her children. She's called the Queen of the Burning Mouths, or the hungry ghosts. Now, as a result of this conversion and food being offered to her in the monasteries, she became a very, favorite type. The story became very, very famous. And statues of her were created all over the place. Matter of fact, if you look up, Hariti is Harti. Harati in Nepal. But if you look up what's called Gandharan art, Gandhara. Is anybody familiar with Gandharan art? Attal, some people? Attal? If you haven't, you will be in for a big surprise. Because this is Buddhist art, heavily influenced by the Greeks, by the Greek kingdoms that existed in northern India. And there's lots and lots and lots of depictions of her, all the way from with all her children to a very fierce figure with tusks holding a trident, as well as beautiful statues of all sorts of Buddhas and all the rest of it. It's mainly in what's now called Pakistan and Afghanistan. But it's quite a wonder to see, particularly if you haven't seen it before. So if you look up Hariti and look up Gandhara, you will see this. So, temples and shrines to her exist all throughout like in Japan, there are temples dedicated to her, as well as in Nepal, and Bali in Indonesia, in China, and certainly in Tibet. And she is, as I say, food offerings are made to her at Zendo meals. And she's supposed to be present at all Dharma talks. The Nepalese call her great-grandmother or grandmother, Hariti Mata, something like that. And they also call her Maha Hariti which they say means the one who converted themselves thoroughly. In those countries, she is the patroness of things like vaccinations, for example, for children. Healing of children, hospitals, there are craft organizations named after her, etc. Okay. This story, which, as I say, you don't need to believe, even if it is completely true, is an excellent illustration of how conversion works in Buddhism. And also how, to some degree, different this is than the usual way we're used to thinking about these sorts of things. Okay? Our tendency to stick blame into it is enormous. You notice that when Buddhism is always interested in beginnings, you notice how this whole business came out of her miscarrying and then blaming other people or circumstances for it. You notice that in the story. Now, of course, it's true that the circumstances occurred in the way that they did. And it's also often true that other people can be responsible to a degree for our suffering. But the thing, of course, to remember is when we experience the results of karma, other people are not there. Okay, whatever their connection with it. And also that the source of karma is ignorance, not evil. And it's important to remember that. Okay. The woman at the time of the miscarriage, that is the way she looked at it. Now, the way she looked at it and the subsequent decision she made caused suffering to herself and to others. But the reason she made that particular choice and that particular vow of revenge came out of what Buddhism calls ignorance. Not knowing that if you set the course of karma in motion in this way, that it is very difficult to undo. You can't actually undo. You can only train yourself in terms of the consequences. There's that verse. I like to quote things, particularly among, forgive me, old people, because they're likely to recognize the quote rather than young people who don't. Omar Khayyam, I think. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Not all your piety nor wit can call it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. If that's kind of obvious in terms of its meaning, or do I need to elucidate the references? That is why we pray in learning precepts and learning meditation. We learn how to be still and then how to both take this stillness into daily life, but also through understanding of the precepts, how to cut the course of karma. The thing with training and understanding karma, which I find very difficult to exactly articulate, but I'll give it a try. The thing about training is that it's like the marriage vows, for better or poorer, what is it, richer or poorer, better or worse, whatever that is. Anyway, I'm getting it mixed up. whatever has happened to you, that is as it is. You cannot undo it. You can only train yourself so that it will not occur again. Do you understand what I mean? I've always liked the metaphor, which I, tell you the truth, might have made up, that it's like, because I've had this experience, it's like getting off the Greyhound in Centralia, which I have definitely done. And you can't remember where you got on. And you're carrying your suitcases, but you don't recognize anything that's in them. Okay, and you don't remember who you are. Think of that. I've had nightmares along those lines. I used to have nightmares where I got the city of San Francisco, Vancouver, and St. John's, where I was born, all confused, and I didn't know where I was. Birth is like that. We come into this world, we carry a set of qualities, we carry a set of predispositions, prejudices, likes and dislikes, but we cannot remember where we got them from. We are carrying a set of baggage that we do not remember having packed. When we find ourselves in this situation, without the teaching of the Buddha or some sort of spiritual teaching, then we just wander around in Centralia, trying to find a restaurant and trying to see if we can get some money or something like that. What the Buddha taught was, one, the recognition of the situation that we find ourselves in. Okay, that was like the Buddha's great teaching, was pointing out that we are in this situation. That we carry, as I say, a set of predispositions, prejudices, whatever. We don't know how we got them. And the Buddha's teaching is that we may not know how we got them, but we can do something about them. One is to practice precepts, and there are all sorts of different precepts within Buddhism. You've got the basic 5, that people are more familiar with. The 10 we use extrapolate out of the 5. So you've got the basic precepts. What the precepts show is, okay, these are the things that lead to the problems. Briefly, killing. Okay? The Buddha wasn't saying that there may be circumstances where you may find yourself in the situation where you kill something. Okay? Whether it's a mosquito or preventing yourself being harmed by somebody else. Okay? He was just saying that there are consequences that flow out of it. That's where compassion comes in the teaching of the Buddha. Without compassion, without the understanding of compassion, you can't really understand how to work or make use of the precepts or the laws regarding karma. Because these things are not a set of examination points. They are, that is the precepts, they are tools that we actually take and apply to our lives, sometimes described as gardening tools. You got your spade. It doesn't do you much good if you simply hold it up in your hand for the neighbors to admire. Um, and, aside from the precepts, and learning to be still. Stillness, in terms of meditation, in terms of this and the why we, in our particular tradition, approach it in this particular way, is because you learn stillness by means of the meditation. But the meditation fundamentally is not a type of exercise, although one of the congregation members in Lytton said that she had thought of it as a holiday for the mind. So you sat there and you didn't need to think about anything or, plan. It's not how do I put it? A set of exercises. The Buddha said, our essence of mind is intrinsically pure. It is covered over by various defilements that have come out of the past accumulation of karma. Meditation is fundamentally to be still by means of letting go, not by means of forcing a type of stillness, by means of letting go. Which brings me back full circle, I hope, to, in the Litany of the Great Compassionate One, it says, Om to the One, which means sort of like victory to the One who leaps beyond all fear. And, as they say in the old hymn, you've got to walk that lonesome valley. You've got to walk it by yourself because nobody else can walk it for you. I hope that isn't too scary to end with. And I will end there. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.